This is a Z-Files special report from the offices of the Okaloosa County Sheriff, Larry Ashley, here in Shalimar. Sheriff Ashley just held a news conference and told us about an arrest they have just conducted called Operation Shady Lane, resulting in at least 36 arrest warrants with more possibly to come, and seizing nearly $120,000 worth of heroin, cash, and other things. Here is Sheriff Larry Ashley.
Sheriff Larry Ashley of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, and we're here today to brief you on an operation that we've conducted and successfully, I believe. The Sheriff's Narcotics Unit started an investigation in February 2016 in conjunction with the Northwest Florida High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force, which includes the DEA Office of Homeland Security, FDLE, Gulf Breeze Police Department, Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office, Pensacola Police Department. It's involving a heroin drug trafficking organization that was operating in Okaloosa County. Since February 2016, we've conducted multiple covert undercover surveillance operations, including infiltrating and conducting controlled drug buys of heroin from members of this drug trafficking organization. In April 2017, members of the Narcotics Unit and the Northwest Florida HIDTA were able to initiate a wiretap investigation involving members of this drug trafficking organization. As a result of that investigation, over 36 arrest warrants were issued for those involved in this case. Of those 36, more than 30 have been arrested so far to date, and we're still seeking the remaining 6 that have not. On May 24th, members of Narcotics Unit Criminal Investigations, K9 and Northwest HIDTA Group executed 3 search warrants at 94 Jose Road, Mary Esther, 600 Lee Street in Fort Walton Beach, and 816 Tanager Avenue, Lot 15 in Fort Walton Beach. All of these locations were being used by this organization to use, store, and sell heroin. In total, approximately 11 ounces of heroin, street value of over $93,000, approximately 7 ounces of cocaine, $20,000 value, approximately 7 firearms to include a stolen firearm and a sawed-off shotgun, 500 prescription pills, 25,000 U.S. currency, and multiple unknown substances that are still being analyzed by FDLE at this point, waiting to identify those. As you can see, this were the items that were seized up here. And the next slide, of course, are those that have been arrested. We'll have a check by their names, and those that we're still seeking are identified as well. Each of you should have got a packet, is that correct? We'll get a packet at conclusion of today's briefing. The reason we wanted to make sure you all were here and know about this operation is because of how heroin's impacted our community and how it's impacted Florida and how it's impacted the U.S. If in 2012 we prescribed more Oxycontin in the state of Florida than the other 49 states combined, that says a lot about the pain management clinics and the like that have occurred. Our state government, the Attorney General and the like, addressed that issue, but those users and those addicts did not go away when we closed down those pain management clinics and pill mills. What has happened is heroin's filled that void, not just in Florida but across the country, and we have to do something because it's not a victimless crime. It's not just a law enforcement problem, though. It's a community problem. And as you can see by the agencies represented here today, we have a great partnership with our state and federal partners. We were one of the first agencies in Florida to use Narcan to try to address some of the overdoses. 2011, we had 0 heroin cases in Okaloosa County. And in 2012, we had 1. And in 2013, we had 11. In 2014, we had 31. 2015, we had 64. 2016, we had 137. And we have 77 to date in the first 5 months of this year. So we're on another record-breaking year for heroin cases. DEA funded this wiretap investigation. We would not have been able to do that without their help. Florida Department of Law Enforcement assisted in funding the controlled buys. Assistant State Attorney Bill Bishop and David Stevens were assigned the case and helped us out tremendously with a legal it's just a great deal of work to try to get a wiretap. And the manpower intensive operation to get into these organizations that there's no other way to get into. we appreciate their help, and we're certainly here to answer any questions. But at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Chad W. Cook, who's Assistant Special Agent in charge with the United States Drug Enforcement Agency, and he has a couple words to say to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Chad Cook, as the Sheriff said, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of Drug Enforcement Administration for the North Florida region. I'd like to thank Sheriff Ashley for hosting this press conference. And, this case was successful because of the partnerships that the Sheriff spoke about between the federal agencies, state and local agencies, using HIDA funding, using the different avenues that are available to everybody and working together, and along with the prosecutors who are vital in the terrific outcome of this case. Anytime we can stop someone from trafficking drugs in our communities, it's a win for us. It's a win for law enforcement, but it's a win for the community as well. In the Pensacola resident office, which Okaloosa County has a task force officer that sits in, a growing number of our cases involve heroin. In fact, nationwide, a growing number of DEA cases involve heroin. It's considered our #1 threat nationwide. In this case, the defendants were distributing heroin, which is extremely addictive, dangerous, and deadly. So as a result of this investigation, these traffickers who distributed death and despair in the form of heroin are out of business today. DEA is very proud of the relationship we share with Okaloosa Sheriff's Office. It's a long-standing relationship, and we'll continue our efforts together to address illicit drug sales throughout the area that plague our communities. Sheriff Ashley has a dedicated team working to make your streets safe, and I also like to commend the State Attorney's Office, who without their dedication and prosecution efforts, this case would not have been successful. And I look forward to continuing these partnerships in the future. Thank you. Sure.
Well, again, I just reiterate that this is a partnership. We can't run these kind of operations without this kind of assistance. These individuals, they sell poison. Again, I go back to I've heard that drugs are a victimless crime. Think about if your sheriff was on drugs. If I was on heroin, would you be comfortable with that? Would you be comfortable if your doctor was on using heroin? Would you be comfortable if the media? Would you be comfortable with anybody using this drug and providing a service for you? This hurts our community, not to mention the number of overdose deaths that we have in our community related to this drug. At this point, though, I'll entertain any questions you have. Some I'll be able to answer, some I won't be able to answer.
Forgive me if you've already addressed this operation, Shady Lane.
Shady Lane. It is the title of this operation. How we get those names, I leave it to our drug guys to come up with those euphemisms.
Why are we seeing an increase in heroin use? Other than why are we seeing this as a hub for selling out of
I don't know that it's a hub, but the reason we're seeing heroin increase as I go back to Florida was the leading distributor of OxyContin in 2012. We literally prescribe more OxyContin out of Florida than the other 49 states combined. That doesn't mean all Floridians were drug addicts. What it meant was that most people throughout the U.S. were coming to Florida to get their OxyContin. And so that void has been filled now. We prescribed over 1 million prescriptions of OxyContin in 2012. So where did those people go now? They go to the cheap alternative. There's a void that was being filled, and it's being filled with heroin.
Are you having to deal with the other pain pill stuff that's also getting into the marketplace?
That's a fine line. Things like OxyContin, things like Percocet, and other pain issues. But you also don't want to victimize those people that have legitimate needs for that and criminalize those individuals. The things that we see that are killing people were OxyContin at the time. We've got that somewhat under control. The things that are killing people now are fentanyl and heroin. And fentanyl is not the prescribed fentanyl that I was just actually briefed today and educated a little bit. Fentanyl is not the typical fentanyl that you see prescribed by doctors for cancer patients and those that have illnesses that are terminal. This fentanyl is coming out of places like China, and it's a synthetic form of a drug that is not your typically prescribed drug. It's an illegal, illicit form of fentanyl.
What's the street value price difference in oxy to heroin? I mean, heroin's obviously the cheaper one, that's why people have been going to it. Do you guys know the price difference?
Not the price difference. Once you start getting, what is it, $20 a hit for Oxycontin for a pill? Probably. I know that a kilo of heroin is probably $90,000 to $100,000, whereas a kilo of cocaine is $30,000. So it is not a inexpensive drug. I've not compared what the cost difference is between Oxycontin and heroin, but I would say it's comparable.
Would you say that the use of heroin is more difficult for your deputies to control, for EMS and EMT to contain in terms of life-threatening life compared to Oxycontin?
Narcan, I think, addresses both of those. It's trying to have a deputy actually tell what's happening with an individual. Are they having a heart attack? Are they having a seizure? Or are they having an overdose reaction? Anytime you try to diagnose a patient's issue, it requires some training. We have had some saves from Narcan, so it's paid for itself already. I don't know how to answer that question any more elaborately than that.
I guess a better question would be, Oxycontin is prescribed and it's regulated pretty, the way it's made is regulated, whereas the heroin that we're seeing has varying amounts of fentanyl depending on where you buy it. And so you might get a different dosage or different strength on heroin. Do you feel that that's more dangerous than the Oxycontin that was on the street 4 years ago?
I would say in some circumstances, yes, but Oxycontin was also not being used as prescribed. So where they crushed it up and used, those time-release properties are then taken out of the drug, and so they get it all at one time, or where they melt it down and shoot it up in a syringe. So it was not being used as a prescribed medication. It was being abused as an illegal drug, and so that they got those quick highs through injections and through crushing. So 6 one way, half a dozen other.
Could you comment on the sophistication of this network? There's a lot of folks that have been arrested, some still at large. I guess the guy at the top is the kingpin, or whatever you want to call him, the head of the organization. Can you comment on that sophistication?
It was organized, but considering that every one of these are current Okaloosa residents or former Okaloosa residents, tells us a lot that that individual, that basically the supplier, that individual had family and friendship ties here in Okaloosa County, and they set up shop here. That's where I think the great deal of organization comes from.
Where did the drugs come from?
Well, Atlanta mostly, to this area. But again, where does heroin come from? It comes from a lot of different locations. I think it comes up out of Mexico and China, and the hubs, whether it's New Orleans or Atlanta or Jacksonville or Tampa or Miami. We are in a central area when you talk about the Gulf Coast, and we are a tourist destination, and people want to be entertained, but unfortunately it affects our residents a lot more than it does our tourists. We just had an incident last week where store clerks passed out behind the counter with a needle sticking in their arm. We have them all the time where we're getting called to convenience stores where people are using drugs inside the bathrooms at convenience stores. I don't send my wife and daughter to the convenience store after 10 p.m. It's an issue that we're all gonna, whether you know you're living with it or not, you will live with it, whether it's your short order cook or whether it's somebody doing your taxes. When you're high on a drug, you are not capable of servicing your community, whatever job you have. And those that don't work become a burden on society, whether it's through welfare or other social programs, that so they don't fall through the net.
Will these folks be prosecuted? How will they be prosecuted? Obviously not all together, or how's that going to work?
I hope to the full extent of the law, but I'll let the...
That's correct. We fully intend to prosecute them to the full extent of the law. Several individuals have been charged with trafficking, which will carry 30-year maximum penalties with various minimal mandatories up to 15 years on each one of those trafficking charges. Some of the other charges carry 15 years. There's approximately, you said 36 sheriff.
Yes, sir.
Some of these are more in the organizational levels of this. They will be prosecuted to full extent. Some of the other individuals, will see where they fell into this as we work our way through it.
Is this sort of a RICO case, an organized crime case?
Well, I think there is some organization to this. There's no doubt about that. It's not going to be a RICO type of situation, at least not at this time. It does not appear. We'll obviously be working our way through that as we make decisions of what to fight. I want to just echo what the sheriff has said, the amount of resources. I want to commend the sheriff's department for the work they did. We had to work hand to hand with the officers that worked on this, and we give them a lot of credit. It takes a tremendous amount of resources to do this. This is a problem that has taken off in our community. I know that right now we're prosecuting several individuals who we've been able to establish that sold the drug to individuals and overdoses occurred. We're successfully prosecuting them for homicide charges at this time. So it's an effort that we're making to try to put a stop to this. We're using all the methods of the law and prosecution that we could use to stop it.
Again, I echo that. We couldn't do this without the state attorney's office and our partners in the federal government. This case is also still currently being investigated, so that there are some, during the course of this investigation, we've learned some things that hopefully will help us solve some additional cases as well.
At the risk of being too Hollywood, you guys have a message for the folks you're still searching for?
Turn yourself in. It's a lot easier and cheaper.
And what would you have the message of some of those neighborhoods that you mentioned just seem like where most people who probably don't make a whole lot of money, just, you know, majority of them just work hard and, you know, do the basic stuff, and they have this in their neighborhood. What message would you say to those folks?
I would say that these individuals are not making your community better, but much worse, much less safe, and that if you have information regarding people who are trafficking and selling drugs in your community, call us. We'll be happy to look at them, talk to them, and investigate them. We can't sit by as citizens any longer and allow this stuff to happen in our communities without even saying anything and expecting somebody else to deal with the problem. This is a community problem, and if we don't do it together, it won't get resolved. We'll just keep doing these things over and over again, but until the community's had a belly full of it and says enough's enough, you know, we can't let our kids. Tell me a single kid in middle school today that wants to be a drug addict. Tell me a single kid in high school that wants to grow up and go to prison. Tell me a single kid whose dreams aren't stolen. Our prisons are full. Our drug clinics are full. And it's because they lose that hope, they lose that dream, they get hooked on some chemical addiction, and who pays for that? That individual pays for it, their families pay for it, and we as taxpayers pay for that. We as citizens pay for that, and the level of service we have in our community, the type of community we live in. Heroin destroys communities. It destroys them, and it won't happen here. Any other questions? Any other comments? No. Thank you so much for coming today, and please get your media packets, which may answer some of the questions that weren't addressed today.